Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. Years ago, I read a book. Someone gave me a book called I've read lots of books. Let me just start out by saying that. I went to college. I went to law school. Lots of reading there. Graduate business school. Lots of reading there as well. Kind of swore off reading. I think most of us do when we get out of school. Nobody says, "Oh, wow, I can't wait to pick up my next book." I mean, certainly novels and fun reading aside. But at one point in my professional life, somebody handed me a book called Bringing Out the Best in People by Alan Loy McGinnis. And it was kind of after this whole pause in really wanting to read anything worthwhile, anything learning oriented. And I read the book and it really just kind of jumped out at me like, wow, there's so much good stuff in here. And in reading the book, that led me to other books and then other books and then other books. And somewhere along the line, I picked up one of John Maxwell's books, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And of course, he references lots of other books. And it just kind of daisy chains out and from one thing to the next. And I have hundreds of books, and I've read most of them. And some are really good, and some lead to other things, and it kind of gets overwhelming at a point because you just can't really keep up. Quickly, if one book leads to 3, and then 3 leads to 9, and 9 leads to 27, you get my point. You literally just can't keep up. The reason I share this with you is, that's kind of what happens with respect to this podcast and researching different topics. Is I'll read an article and the article will reference other studies, and I start looking into those other studies, and that kind of spiders out into all sorts of different types of things. Well, a couple weeks ago, I talked about follow-up questions. It was just kind of a quick little quib, and it got me looking into wanting to understand it more, and I stumbled across an article called, this was in the Harvard Business Review, it's in their May-June 2018 edition, The Surprising Power of Questions. And it's written by 2 associate professors, well, they were associate professors at the time, Allison Wood Brooks and Leslie K. John. Interesting article, and I'm going to really throw a lot at you with respect to this. What they do in the article is they reference their own research, and I got to be honest, I could probably do a whole podcast on questioning after reading this article, because it's just fascinating the types of things that are out there and they're looking at, not just them but other people researching questions. And it goes through all sorts of research. And so I'm going to really take a high level look at this article and things in here, and we can touch upon things. We'll touch upon things as we go on. But they start out the article talking about that there are certainly professions out there. There are litigators, there are journalists, and there are doctors who are really taught to ask questions. As somebody who has a legal background, I know there's an art to it. The people who are litigators, they just don't show up in court and just start firing questions out. They have a method to their madness, and they really think it through, and they hone that skill. And they watch other litigators, and they learn, and they become very good at it. Couldn't explain why, because I was never a litigator, but I have to believe that there's a reason why some people are really successful litigators, and other people really don't even want to touch it. But what they continue on in the article to talk about is that few executives, and I'll interchange executives with business people, think about questioning as a skill that they can get better at. And I, be honest, I really hadn't thought about it. I tell people engage in conversations and get the other person talking. And that's the extent that I talk about it. but I think there's more to it. And well, there is more to it as I start to read this article. Um, and so what they do in this article again is they just start delving into the research that other people are putting out there. And I'll be honest that as I was reading this, I took a couple screenshots, sent it to my wife and kids, and just let them, especially my kids. Boy, you're years behind me. If you can pick up on this stuff now, you're going to be that much better off. But in here, uh, the two authors, Brooks and John, say, people don't ask enough questions. And what they have found is that by asking questions, and they reference some research here where they'll give a certain group the task of asking many questions, at least 9 in 15 minutes, and others are to ask very few, no more than 4 in 15 minutes. And what they find is that the people asking more questions end up knowing more about their partner, and they will quiz them afterwards. But then there's also a better relationship there when there are additional questions that are asked. One of the things I cut out or took a screenshot of and sent to my kids was basically what they found, and this was a researcher out of the London Business School and University of North Carolina. The research suggests that most people, when they get in a job interview, excessively self-promote. And the interviewee focuses on themselves or trying to get a job. It only seems natural. That was me when I was interviewing. Okay, what you're kind of thinking about all the things you need to be asking, but what they found is that the interviewee should be coming with questions and make the interviewer feel more engaged. Ask the interviewer questions. Ask them about themselves. Tell me your journey. Talk about the organization. Talk about the work that they do. What do they like? What do they dislike? And those are powerful things that can help you become more successful. So again, there's a magic to questions that can tap into. It goes on in the article to talk about in thinking about questions in conversations, the types of questions, the tones of the questions, the sequence of the questions, all that stuff tends to matter. And obviously there's different settings with respect to questions. They talk in here that it's a whole spectrum. On the one end, you have very competitive type questions, litigators, negotiators, things like that. Those people asking questions, it's really kind of a competitive nature. I don't want to say winner take all, but there's some gamesmanship going on there. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's cooperative questioning, just people just kind of talking to learn about one another. And they provide a graph in here, or not a graph, but a chart as to how to approach a competitive conversation when you're asking questions. And I won't go into the whole thing here. This is something you ought to look up. But there's a book out there, I believe, that they've written. It's in the article. It's in the article again. It's in the May-June 2018 Harvard Business Review. But it kind of gets you thinking about, okay, when you're asking questions and it's a competitive situation, remember that your conversational partner is likely to be reluctant to share information. You're answering questions and it's a negotiation. You have to be careful. You have to be guarded with everything that you say. And so if you're questioning in that situation, you need to recognize that and you need to think through it. That's where litigators really become successful in getting information out from the people that they're questioning in open court or interrogatories or whatever it might be, depositions. In here, they talk about 4 different types of questions. There are introductory questions. How are you? And then there are mirroring questions. I'm fine. How are you? And then they call some questions full switch questions. Ones that change the entire topic of conversation. And those full switch questions are kind of where you go from small talk to getting down to a little more business type things. And then there are follow-up questions. And in my previous conversation about conversations and follow-up questions can be a real powerful thing. And they talk about that study in here, and that people who ask more follow-up questions tend to be more successful in getting information, more successful in building relationships. The other thing they talk about in here is that the order you ask questions is important, and it certainly depends on the circumstances. If you're in a very cooperative type of environment, you're going to want to ask easier questions up front. You're not going to want to get right down to brass tacks. Whereas if you're in a competitive type thing, you can take a different tact with that. You can start a little stronger. But you don't want to do that when your goal is to build a relationship with somebody. And obviously in a competitive setting, you're not necessarily looking to build that relationships. They also talk about tone and having the right tone. And they say people are more forthcoming when you ask questions in a casual way rather than in a buttoned up official tone. Now, obviously, if you're just having a casual conversation with somebody, you're going to use a casual tone. But if you're in a setting, a more business setting where we'll call it somewhat more competitive, trying to be casual, you're going to be better off, as opposed to when you have that official tone, everything becomes a little more tense. They also say people also tend to be more forthcoming when given an escape hatch or an out in a conversation. For the example they use is if somebody is told that they can change their answer at any point, they tend to open up more, knowing that they can retract and say, well, I know I gave you a rating, the rating of that situation between 1 and 5 is 3, but now after thinking about it and talking through it more, I'm going to give it a 1. So they're more likely to talk, as opposed to if you say, okay, here's the answer, you have a 1, and this is your one and only time to answer. Okay, you're stuck with that answer. They're going to be a little more guarded with respect to what they're saying. To me, this article is fascinating and will likely be something that I will revisit from time to time. I'm going to certainly hang on to it and dig into more of the research, more examples of different things, and maybe just really tackle different parts of it in separate, take a deeper dive with various parts of this throughout in different episodes of the podcast. But what I've come away with, and I hope you come away with, is that there, as the article is titled, there is surprising power to questions, to how we ask questions, what we ask, the order we ask them, and the tone that we ask those questions. So I want to kind of change my answer from all the things I've said before. It is important that we get the other person talking, and it's important that we ask questions to get them talking, but it's also important how we go about those questions. And I think it's certainly something I'm going to be thinking about more as I talk with people and try and get information from people and learn about people, learn about situations, thinking a little bit more on the front end. And that's what made Johnny Carson and Larry King and the talk show hosts. If you've listened to Lewis House's the School of Greatness podcast, he does an awesome job of asking questions as well. We all can be a little bit better with respect to how we approach questioning others. To wrap up, remember, we're looking for entrepreneurial types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking and the exchange of referrals in a structured weekly morning meeting. The unique thing about this franchise, however, is because these meetings are in the morning and only over a couple hours, it allows a successful business type to add this on to what they're already doing. All our franchisees do something else for a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week. They work the AmSpirit Business Connections model. The rest of the time, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, financial advisors, coaches, consultants of various kinds. So essentially what this does is it allows somebody to make more money from building more professional connections, but it allows them to make money actually building those connections. So perhaps you know somebody, perhaps you are somebody. Whatever the case, if you want to learn more about our franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of the program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.